this one and be like, oh yeah, I do recall that person now. And then it might just create other opportunities there, opposed to just like kind of beating a dead horse, and then eventually bombarding them, and then you're not going to really develop any good rapport with anyone else at that.
Totally. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. So we definitely talked a lot, and I want to kind of get into some, before we start closing here, about some lessons learned. So from your experience, what things have devs and public relation figures done to have a lasting impact on you?
Going back to those elementary school virtues, being kind and friendly, the golden rule, treat others the way you want to be treated. That's definitely had lasting impressions on me. And, everyone has to kind of find a balance of being personable and being professional.
Mm-hmm.
But as you recognize these names in these emails more, and as you interact more over the months and the years, and as you start to meet them in person and shake their hands at conventions, and they become more of a person to you, and potentially friends. You saw me at PAX East 2020. Like I was in a panel with Victoria Tran. Was kind of like their communications director. I think that's literally her title. And she found me when I was writing, when I was an intern for Pace Magazine. I wrote an article for Boyfriend Dungeon.
Okay.
She contacted me she found me through email. She contacted me for like, hey, we got more information on you. And then she found me when I moved on to Dual Shockers and when I moved on to Uppercut, and we became like Twitter mutuals, and we just had like a very friendly relationship where we got to the point where she would send like standard, hey, we announced a game today, and she would hello Christopher, as many people would put in. It was like, hey, what's up, Chris? Like just kind of like informal, and obviously that's not gonna happen to every single relationship, but it's nice to see them as a person, I guess, and to have like this very approachable attitude, I think will get you very far.
Yeah, and thank you for providing that example, because we've had Victoria on the show before too, but still, besides that, it's just the fact of her process and how she like engaged with you and everything was just it's really nice. Like kind of followed along certain beats, certain touch points and stuff, and then kind of like you said, like she's treating you like a person and stuff, and just keeping you informed as well. And from that, you guys really established a good working relationship on that end. So yeah, thank you for that, because I think sometimes it's hard to kind of like visualize with that, because when we're talking so much about like ways to stand out and awareness and Twitter and all that, it doesn't really come as forward, and putting it in that way, that example was really helpful in there.
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite memories with her is just at E3, E3 when that was a thing back in 2019. I like wanted to interview her for Boyfriend Dungeon, but we were also hungry, so it was just like half professional, half personal. We got lunch, and I also interviewed her.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Two birds. I like the way you do business, man. Two birds, one stone right there. That's perfect.
Right.
But still, another great opportunity where it wasn't just, business related, but you guys, could still build upon that relationship, which is awesome. Now, what are some mistakes that indie devs or other public relation figures make when they're trying to leverage the media contact?
It's going back to that bombardment of emails and almost like harassing them for coverage, and that whole I'm wondering why you haven't covered this yet. So honestly, just people not being professional and courteous, and even small things like not proofreading their emails. There have been some weird situations where like I don't know, but I got. This was for a larger game company, so this was surprising. I had to fill out a Google form to request a review copy, rather. And not only was I kind of weirded out by that, also there were typos in the Google form, and there was one field that was just like incorrect. Like you just couldn't put in what you wanted to put in because the way it was set in the back end just wasn't allowing that.
Okay.
So I just found like little things like that to kind of look unprofessional, which was very weird considering how high profile of a game and a company this was. I also had I received a kind of a cold email about an indie game. It was from a Yahoo account, and like that could be okay if it's like game studio name at Yahoo or game studio name at gmail.com. It's like, yes, yeah, you don't have much of a budget for like your own domain or
right.
or what have you. But this was the person's name at yahoo.com. And again, there were like typographical errors and no presentation of credentials. So I actually had to kind of double check and be like, hey, and like I had to contact the actual developers. Like, hey, is this PR person actually with you, or am I being grifted or something here? And it turns out they were. And I was like, okay, well that's good, but silently I was like, I think you should find a different PR person. And then that was a weird situation too, because a different PR person Twitter DM'd me about that same game, completely unrelated to this person. So it's like, I think those guys have to kind of get things in line.
So it definitely comes back into kind of obviously a sense of professionalism, but it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, just kind of an offshoot of, you know, what's good to represent you from a public image standpoint. And it's definitely one right there is where you're also representing yourself when you're reaching out to people. And it sounds like in that case, not only was it making it difficult for you, but you might start, because of those actions and other things, you might start questioning, is this something I'm really going to be, you know, care about covering, or is it going to really meet my needs and everything else? And the game could be awesome, but how they're representing themselves is not helping or doing them any favors on that front.
Yeah, and you know, a lot of these indie developers will probably utilize some sort of firm. Like I can probably name several, like Evolve PR is one, the Indie Bros, Sandbox Strategies, so and so. Find the right one. This is a piece of practical advice. I'm not sure where the Yahoo person came from, but well, and you know, and I guess advice for press people: validate their credentials.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
I had to find this person on LinkedIn. I had to like figure out like, hey, does this person actually speak for you? So
yeah,
do your due diligence.
Yeah, I would say that's a good point, and hopefully a lot of the stuff that we talked about today are some, you know, helpful, you know, information where people can kind of use this to, when they're seeking out PR firms and stuff, can kind of like formulate some questions from there to really make sure that they're working with someone who knows what they're doing. All right. And then another thing I was curious about was, like, you know, are there any particular types of studios or people that you look forward to covering projects for?
Probably depends on who you're asking, I think.
Okay.
Like there are some people who, you know, they just love video games and they're like enthusiasts and whatnot, and they just want to cover any AAA game, like any PlayStation exclusive or Nintendo's big release or what have you. And you know, that's certainly valid. Like a lot of people get into the business like just for those opportunities, which is really cool. I'm more of an indie games person. We all have our own small titles that we're excited for, and like, you know, when I was with Uppercut, I would always receive text messages. It's like, hey, I found this game. Can you be on the lookout for this? And they'll probably find it because like maybe there's something on social media, maybe a peer of them worked on the game or a friend of them worked on that game. And you know, like I myself, I'm a queer Asian American person, so like things with those themes like kind of get attracted to me. Like A Summer's End is one such game that came out recently that I was like, oh, hello there. I gotta check this out. And you know, certain studios and named developers and individuals, like they'll probably have some sort of pedigree. So no matter what, people probably follow them, probably literally follow them on Twitter just to see whatever they're up to, and have that urge to cover it. So it again depends who you're asking for, but who you're asking, but probably just whatever is aligning with their personal interests and aligns with whatever inspired them to get into the business in the first place.
Yeah, and those sounds like, if you can do that and figure that out, those are probably going to be the best people to approach and kind of increase your chances of getting coverage, at least. Because, and I think it goes back to the symbiotic thing, because yeah, we identified some objectives that certain publications may have, but the individual or the journalist covering those, and this could even be said for a lot of this can be applied for influencers as well. But if you know about that person or what is their passion or their drive, and that got them into the industry as it was, and your game is somewhat either reminiscent or resonates with that same audience and that person, then it would make sense to do that. So I think that's a great point that you brought up, is if you can find out what really inspired them to do what they're doing now, I would find it hard to believe if it didn't work out somehow to
Right.
develop some type of relationship there. So cool. All right, we talked about a lot. So,
Oh yeah.
in light of everything we discussed, do you think you could provide a list of about 5 suggestions or tips that you'd recommend to indie devs when they're building relationships with media figures?
And it's a lot of it's just a summary of things I've said in the past hour. But I would say the first thing is finding those right media outlets that will fit your project, and I think that finding the outlets with that right audience, that'll just kind of again create that domino effect. And you made a good point just now. Like influencers are really important in this ecosystem now, especially with YouTube. Like, I've been to press events and half of them are YouTube enthusiasts, like the people who will say, "Oh my God, oh that's great," like no matter what they're showing. So finding people who will not certainly sell your game for you, but will certainly depict it, in an attractive way.
Yeah.
I think is probably the most important. I guess my number 2 would be to that whole idea of being personable but also professional when reaching out to people. So, there are plenty of people who you would consider like a peer, not a friend, or like an acquaintance, and you are friendly and cordial, and like that's probably ideal. Like you might enjoy talking to this person, but they're not like some robots there to sell games. Like you have a good working relationship with this person, and it makes you want to kind of cultivate that relationship. It's really simple, but that gets you a long way. Number 3, taking advantage of conventions to stand out to press, because it's a totally different game, no pun intended, when you have a physical presence, and like when you are speaking to them and you are asking questions, they are answering in real time about their game. But if you're in a pandemic, then maybe pay attention to point number 4, where social media is super important for building publicity and excitement. You can attract media attention through going viral or just being retweeted by the right people.
Yep.
And number 5, which I didn't really touch on, LinkedIn is very underrated, I feel, as a platform for networking in games. And I found that really important when I was with Apricot. First of all, like kind of creating my own profile, so when these press and PR people look me up, they know that I'm legit. I work for this indie games outlet, I am not some sort of grifter who is trying to steal review codes, because there are a lot of those out there. Just a
Yep.
warning. And